I guess the machine is on, and I'm ready. Today I'd like to introduce myself to those of you who have never seen me before. I'm Ron, and I've done a few videos in the past that I've been asked to do to cover various topics. Today, this one is probably the most serious one of all, and this one is entitled Banksters. It's terribly important that people that have some financial difficulty present, looming, or see it into the future, that they know how to protect themselves and their property. It's terribly important because of the responsibilities that go along with that. And I'll tell you, I've spent a lot of time studying the laws in this country. I've spent from 1962 on, because I could see problems coming in agriculture. And after working on those for an extensive period of time, I could see it coming for those folks in a heavy fashion that live in the major cities and other local communities. And basically this, ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you that I like the laws in this country. I am surprised as to how good they are. Because of the way in which they are made, in political nature and so on and so forth, one would tend to think that they might not be good. But they're there, they're very well prepared, and all it requires is for you to declare and use the law. We have some problems in this country, and it's mostly in the educational field. Number one, I know that many of you will be listening to this tape will have used this most dangerous instrument known to man. You have signed your name on things, not knowing the ramifications of those things in which you affixed your signature on. I also know that the majority of you were never taught the debt capital system. So how would you know what basis to stand on for declaring the law? We're not taught that in school, and people need to know that debt capital system in school. Also, they need to know the law in this country and how to use the law, how to declare it. Because if you don't declare the law, you're not going to get a remedy. It's not there for you if you don't declare it, stand on it, and insist on it. Also, I want you to know that way back in the middle 80s, a big case was filed in Bismarck, North Dakota, and because we had litigants in 45 states, we classed that case. And the case is entitled Coleman versus Block, and you can certainly look at it, you can shepherdize it, and see the results of it. And so once we had it classed in 45 states, we went before Bruce Van Sickle, federal judge in Bismarck, North Dakota. And we did so because we knew that Youngers in his family were having the same kind of problem. And the problem was basically this. Agency officials of the federal government, basically the Farmers Home Administration, had been foreclosing on farmers without giving them an opportunity to restructure loans. And the farmers knew that if they ever were moved off of their farm by gunpoint or whatever, that they'd never get back on. They knew that. Yet most of our city cousins didn't know that once you lost your home, you couldn't get another one, because many of them could go to another state, another community, or whatever back in those days, and latch onto something else and try to work that through. And so they were not as interested in the problem that we'd discovered. Anyway, we prevailed in federal court, and the reason we prevailed is there is not a federal foreclosure statute. So then, why we got all of this trouble? Well, we got national banks out there. I call them banksters. We got state banks out there that are under the national banks, because in order to access the Fed, they got to go through a national bank to get there. So the banking community is where it's at. And I want to tell you, back in '62, I was already aware that the biggest business in America at that time was the theft of equity as it pertained to agriculture. Biggest business in America was go out and steal the farm, and the equipment, and the livestock, and the grain, and leave the farmer out of business. Well, when we were able to prove there wasn't a federal foreclosure statute, then we had to take a look at why the debt capital system was not understood. The law is awful important, and we can't be running around in this country without teaching it. And the place to teach it is in school. Maybe you got to replace a little basketball, football, and some other sports to be teaching it, but it needs to be taught. Otherwise, you're going to graduate from high school and actually take this most dangerous instrument and sign yourself into slavery for the majority of your life, if not all of it, and structure yourself to be taken advantage of. And you will. I don't guarantee a lot, but from what I've seen clean across this country, I'm guaranteeing you that's what's going to happen if you don't know what it is you sign and realize the consequences of it. So that's where it is. And once that case was won, it was won in January of '84. It was a short time thereafter, a couple of years, the FLAP organization, which was the organizer behind it, had an annual meeting in Watertown, South Dakota, and appointed me to investigate the farm credit system. And my assignment was to do the research on it wherever I went in the country, and to see if there wasn't some place I could find the farm credit system violating the law. Now, you know, that's quite an assignment. And they give me 1 year to come back to the next annual meeting with a full report. And so they were concerned I probably wouldn't accept that assignment, but I'll tell you, it interested me because of their concern. And so I went to work on it, and I did some research. And I want to tell you something. From North Dakota to Texas, from California to the East Coast, I couldn't find a single place where the farm credit system had complied with any law. Now, isn't that something? Nothing. As a matter of fact, in a couple of cases, we spiked it a little bit so that we would get good questions asked of the top employees of the farm credit system. And I want to tell you, we were able to prove in federal court that the financial system, known as the Agricultural Credit Program, that in all the years this lady had been in charge of the drafts, the money, the alleged money, the drafts, the site drafts that they issued for everything, she had never ever paid a single one in all of those years. Wouldn't that strike you just a little bit strange? They'd never registered to do business in any state. They didn't have a certificate of authority to do business in any state, nor did they have any live person responsible for the behavior of the company in the state. And the place where you check for that is at the Secretary of State's office. 3 things: registration to do business, certificate of authority to do business, and a live body responsible for the company's behavior. Because you see, you can't, companies are dead persons under the law. You can't put them in jail. You could put them out of existence. The Secretary of State can cancel their privilege to do business if indeed they're registered there, but when they're not, you can't. Okay? So, when they're not, with those 3 items, registration, certificate of authority to do business, and a live person responsible for the company, guess what? They can't commence any foreclosure action in any state court. How about that? And in the federal court system, where's the foreclosure statutes? You see, the banksters contributed heavily to various state legislatures to get in existence state statutes for foreclosure. So the only relatively honest people, relatively, I didn't say honest, but relatively honest people in the world of finance will be a government agent at a government agency. Basically the Department of Agriculture's Farmers Home Administration, which is an entitlement in fact, and under the Department of Interior, the Department of HUD, and its Federal Housing Administration there, and in the Veterans Administration, it'll be the VA right there. They gotta have the forms. If you're a vet, and you're a vet in good standing, bang, if you need help on rewrite of debt and so forth, that's a place. Also, for those business people, it's the Small Business Administration. Those are the big entitlements. The problem with the entitlements is, number one, that people don't know that you go there and you apply for an application, you get an application, you get a copy of their note, a copy of their mortgage, and a copy of at least the co-agreement to use their bank account on your promissory note. Their bank account, not your bank account, their bank account. And that both you and them have to sign the check that goes to cover payoff, on the restructuring and so forth. And you got to prove one thing: you're in financial trouble, and you need help there because you can't get it elsewhere. I'll cap it by saying this: you do not ever want a guaranteed loan or a subordinated loan, because that puts you in the realm of state statutes of foreclosures, because it'll be the government agent guaranteeing the bankster and not you. And the bankster will take full advantage of it. And so you don't want that. But direct in, yep, and you have a right to it. Now, one of the other things I want to tell you in traveling this country recently is they've changed so much help in these departments that the majority of them that are there now are not aware of what happened in the past, and they're not aware of the law. You can assume that they're probably as unknowledgeable in the law as you are. But you see, you can't run around being unknowledgeable. You've got to know, and you've got to assert. And that's one of the easiest ways to get out of financial trouble, is to buy yourself time. Because if you ever end up in trouble there again, you can go in and request administratively the documentation to apply for a write-down of principal and interest down to cash flow. Actually, ladies and gentlemen, you have that right now even with the banksters, because of the TARP Act and the Smith Act. A lot of this money that was put in trust at these banksters was to be available so that if you were going to run late or were late, you could go in and say, hey, I got to have it written down from this, at least this amount, so that I can pay on the balance. And when you made application for that, that's what those trust funds were available for. And how many people even know of it? The banks haven't. And they cannot transfer those trust funds to offset the face value of your promissory note or what's left owed, or a portion of what's left owed on that note, without your written request. If you don't know, you won't apply. So you can even go as low as the Banksters to do a rewrite. However, they're not interested in telling you or helping you at the beginning of it, because they're interested in the biggest business that's in America today, which is the theft of equity. And equity is the down payments you made. Equity is the payments that you made. And equity is possession. If you're in possession of the property, you have equity. Even if somebody says in an appraisal that the property is way cheaper now than what you still owe on it, so what? You have a deal. You can use that information to apply for write-down of the principal amount under the TARP Act and the Smith Act. Most people aren't doing it. Most people aren't pushing the follow-through. You can't count on a bankster to do anything unless you push it. They're not going to do nothing, because by him doing nothing, he'll assign it to a scam group to take the property away. Anyway, after that research on the farm credit system, when I made that report, the people at the annual meeting couldn't hardly believe what I was saying was correct. However, time has seen to it, and the farm credit system has lost over 60% of its total business, because the word did get out. They never even bothered to tell their help that they lost. So who was to tell the farmers they couldn't foreclose? They had to rewrite under terms and conditions they could live with. Staffers didn't even know it, let alone know the law. They didn't even know that government lost the decision. And that decision was never appealed. And it's way over 20 years in existence, that decision, I mean. And now the federal judge has moved on to the hereafter, and he does deserve a place, you know, higher up, because of the good decisions he did make while he sat on the bench as a federal judge. And his name was Judge Bruce Van Sickle. So I salute him. And he did it based on the law, and it helped a lot. Now, just for a minute, let's get into the problem with the banksters. Right here, pretty much everyone that's going to view this video knows about this book. It says the Holy Bible. The basic natural law is there. It's in it. That's not ever been overcome. It's there, it's it, and it's very natural in nature. And so, you know, that's the first touch with the law. Then there is this Constitution. Everyone believes that you have all of these rights. I can tell you this, you're entitled to all of these rights. But unless you prepare and unless you assert them, you won't get the benefit of any of them. They'll just be a taking and a house cleaning. Are you hearing me? And this is a good document. You know, and of course I refer a lot of people to Article 6, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution. And we're dealing in civil matters here. And that is, the Constitution and the treaties of the United States are the supreme law of the land. You hear me? The Constitution and the treaties. So if you're on the treaty side of things, you've got an additional plus to add to the Constitution, and that may be of interest to you someday. But nevertheless, I'm here to tell you that that's the supreme law, and all else is lesser law. One of the other things you need to know, and that is about 80% of the state statutes and the federal constitutions, federal statutes, are unconstitutional. And if you hire a person to represent you who has a privilege, he's contracted in. So he has no choice but to accept and go by the unconstitutional statutes. And so you won't get the help there that you are looking for, because you think you can hire it done. Even though it may cost an arm and a leg, you think you can hire it done rather than you take the time and the effort to learn and do the follow-through. I'm telling you, that don't work when it comes to foreclosure. Okay? Now let's go back just a little bit to the debt capital system. When you sign the promissory note, you are the creator of that much capital. The reason I say that is because in 1864, the Comptroller of Currency Act was passed, and the banksters from that time could not lawfully lend depositors funds. So you're not a borrower. In fact, you are a creator of the capital when you sign that promissory note. Now, because you're a member of the human race and are deemed, not to be perfect, as none of us are, you can't hold your own promissory note. You got to have someone else hold it. And that's why you walk into a bank building. I call them the crystal palaces of the banksters. And so that you can sign a note there, because there's a trustee there that's supposed to hold the note, hold it safe, and that's why the vault is there in the bank. If they burn the Federal Reserve notes that are strewn around the bank, because a fire took place in the bank itself, oh fine, they can always reprint those. But when they lose the promissory note where your signature went on it, there is no beneficiary anymore. There is no claim in fact anymore. Now, are you hearing me? There is no claim in fact anymore if they lost the original, no copies, original of the promissory note, because that's the original creation of capital. Also, I want you to know that the mortgage is what is put on the public record to cover that creation of capital. It is now assets. And if you went to purchase something that you didn't already own, that you weren't refinancing and so forth, it's the bank's reserves that are at the Fed that cover that purchase until the ink is dry on your promissory note and the mortgage. Then their reserves are automatically released, and it's all a matter of accounting. So you created the capital, and they use their reserves just for a few minutes until the ink is dry, and then of course the asset, the mortgage, that goes onto the public record in the local county, at the courthouse, at the Register of Deeds, or county recorder. They call them that in some states, county recorder. That doesn't make any difference if we're talking about mortgages here or deeds of trust. Basically, it's the same thing. It's the assets backing the creation of capital that you just made, and now you are responsible for repayment. I found two things in the debt capital system that are a problem that you should be told right up front before you ever sign in the first place. Number one, the interest is never created at the time that you create the principal. Are you hearing me? So there's going to be a shortness of medium of exchange in circulation. So being that your interest was not created by you at that time, and you got to pay interest plus principal, the principal is circulated, but the interest isn't. And so you got to go grab somebody else's principal, to pay your interest. So you got to go suck in the market in order to accomplish it, because there's a shortness of circulating medium of exchange out there. And it's structured that way, so that if you're not good at grabbing, you end up losing. And then what happens? The banks got the promissory note, the banksters got the promissory note, and the banksters now the trustee and the owner of the property. That's assuming they got it. One of the reasons In this last investigation that I spent 3 years on it, by the way, looking at the home foreclosure things and what was going on in various parts of the country, and also trying to come up with innovative things where people could save their homes. And I want to tell you, you know, I'm accustomed to wearing a cap because I'm just an old farmer. And in those days, I used to work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now that I'm retired, a lot of what I do is based on that. And I get calls coming in and people want to know where they are, what to do next. And so I volunteer that. And I only do 13 hours a day. From 9 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, Central Time. So now that I'm, you know, retired, I just shortened my days by 3 hours. Anyway, I have had the opportunity to convey certain information to individuals so they've been able to take their homes and keep them. The other thing is most people believe, especially in a home, that they either have a 20 or a 30-year contract on those because it was a 20 or 30-year note. Well, I'm here to tell you, in all honesty, they're only 30-day notes. Because any 30 days, the bankster can elect to give you notice of intent to foreclose, and you got 30 days to pay in full. Otherwise, they start legal process by issuing you a summons. Now they're getting so lazy and they've been so successful in the thefts that I've run across foreclosure processes where a summons was never even issued. Because people are getting caught up in fraud. And I'm not talking about those that are deemed to be the debtors now. I'm talking about those that are deemed to be the creditors. They're the ones getting caught in the fraud. And that's quite a story on the investigative part. You can't take a single thing they got to say on paper as gospel. It's your job to question everything and question it closely and try to get access to the information yourself. This is North Dakota Rules, a book, court book. It's important that anybody that's going to be facing financial problems, I mean, get to a law library or to a library, local library, when once a year they tend to replace these and at least get the ones they're going to throw out. Because the rules ain't changing that much each year, if at all. The bottom line is, all actions, civil in nature, commence with the issuance of a summons. You got no summons, you got no foreclosure. And you tell them to kiss off. Otherwise, you're going to hold them personally responsible. And if they don't kiss off, the first thing you do is bill them for what they're claiming. You have to start that scenario right up front, because if you don't bill them, what penalty are they going to have for committing fraud before the court? That's terribly important, because I'm going to tell you, in almost 100%, not exactly 100%, but almost 100% of the foreclosures in this country, the people doing them are not in possession of the original note. They don't have it. They're not the beneficiary listed on the original mortgage. They're not. And people, well, they're bringing the claim, they must have something. Huh? I'm telling you, most don't have any claim at all. And if you want to check one of the major cases that came down here a year and a half ago, you check the Mears case in Florida, out of Tampa. I'm here to tell you that one day, people who stood up for their rights saved 25 homes of their own. They didn't have nothing. Remember I was telling you about people having to have companies having to be registered with the Secretary of State and having a certificate of authority and having a live body responsible for the company doing the suing? Because they can't commence any action in state court without that. Here, North Dakota, you can shepherdize it. 102219 of the North Dakota Century Code. Can't commence any civil action. Because they're not authorized to do business in the state. That's simple. So there's something to lean on a little bit. The other thing is on accounting. If you look at the documents, you'll see there's an APR on those documents, annual percentage rate. Right? Now let's just say that you believe you have a 30-year loan. Yet when you made the first payment, what happened in their accounting? They paid interest first. Interest isn't earned until annually in the arrears. You hear me? Let's just say you just signed the note January 1. Well, interest ain't due till the last day of December, and January 1 comes the next day. Now interest is due. So the payments made then have to pay interest, and then the rest goes to principal till the year is up. Are you hearing me? So do the accounting that way, and guess what you'll find? On a 30-year alleged obligation, you will find that you have paid it in full in 14 years, 5 months to 14 years, 7 months. So why pay twice when you're paying principal and interest lawfully? You can prove fraud in any foreclosure action just by bringing in your own personal accounting and say, and this is correct, pursuant to my understanding, because it's annual percentage rate. What are they going to do then? Get somebody on the witness stand to testify also that they misapplied payments to interest before it was earned? No, they're not going to testify against themselves like that. Are they going to testify to the fact that you gave them the money? That they never lent any? No. See, they don't like cases like that, because that's fraud 101. Remember, they don't have those crystal palaces because they put a lot of money into banking. They have them because you put a lot of money into banking. And I'm here to tell you, the bigger the bank you're doing business with, the more dishonest they are. It goes by scale of size. How did they get there? Above the others. There's not many banksters you can find in this country that are an asset to a community. There's a few. I've met a few in all of these years. And they were an asset in the community, and they never did foreclosures. They always worked it out so that you could prevail. Now those are what's supposed to be out there, but they're not, for the most part. You got to really look to find those. Why aren't they? Because most of the banksters aren't even educated. I've had people go and ask the president of banks, hey, did you ever read this mortgage document that you're asking me to sign? And the president of the bank say, well, no, I haven't. Don't ever assume they know the law. And of course you can couple that with lawyers as well. They'll waive the rights like you wouldn't believe. Because why? You're not the power that be. The banksters are. Why? Because they've done a lot of stealing in their life. They've done a lot of looting in their life. But they're lazy in doing it themselves. They'll get somebody else, like people that wear badges and you're paying them as a taxpayer. They'll use them to go do their stuff for them, their risky stuff, they're stealing for them. They'll use attorneys to do it, but attorneys are lazy too. But why do they bring a foreclosure in the first place? To get the judge to involve so that he can order the taxpayers' help to go do the stealing from you. And they don't just steal real estate, they steal personal property and so forth. They can't be trusted along that line, because I've seen it numerous times, and even in my cases, it's happened. Honesty in the system, now, but it's your job as a citizen of this country to see to it that honesty prevails in the system. I'm going to tell you right now, you won't find it there, but you can make it prevail. Why? I tell you, those that have the intestinal fortitude, this is why I'm taking my cap off for a few minutes. The reason I'm taking this off is to salute those that have stood up, protected, fought for their property, and caught the other side lying, cheating, and stealing. That's how you get to protect your property. And I'll tell you this, property titles don't change hands in this country by any process other than you walking off and leaving it. Abandonment only, and there will be an officer of the law that will actually file an affidavit of abandonment on the real estate after he thinks you have abandoned it. Got it? Abandonment's not an option. Also, if you allow transfer of assets, being that you created the capital to somebody else, you could get hit with an IRS claim. I know, I lived that. And I want to tell you, anybody sends you a false 1099, you use a 4598 form and you cancel it right now and notify the IRS of it in that form. Otherwise, they're going to end up clipping your check for taxes on what they stole from you. It's like a thief who would walk into a jewelry store and steal a ring that has $500 price tag on it. If he's working under the Internal Revenue Code and operating in that fashion, he's obligated to report that as a taxable transfer, a benefit to him. Now, don't count on them doing that, but I'm telling you that's what that law requires if you are in it. And I can remember them having to strip that page out of the 1099 instruction booklet because I reported those individuals who did the stealing as receiving the taxable value. And that's what was put in the instruction booklet. And then, of course, they stripped all the files of those too. So, where they had them piled up for people to take and use as an instruction manual. The bottom line is that is a taxable transfer. And you don't want to be hit with the taxes on it. So the motive is there for you to stand and fight for the property. But also, to get into these entitlements into government agency, those are lenders of last resort, these government agencies. You got to be able to show you're in trouble. And a letter of notice of intent to foreclose is absolute proof you're in need of assistance. But don't assume those people know the law and the process, so you've got to know. And I think I've done some other videos that go through that deeper than I have time to do it right now. Because right now I'm going to try to give you some of the things that I was able to obtain in this investigative effort. And by the way, and this covered from Los Angeles to Florida. So it's California to Florida. This covered from Washington State on out to New York and New Jersey. Are you hearing me? That's a lot of area. Here's some of the most serious things I have found. So be sure you got your ears on. And if nothing else, grab a sheet of paper so you can jot a few notes. Because in your English, as you go through it, you may be able to recall what is said. I found in this country that after people had walked in to a Banksters bank and signed promissory note, giving it to the banker, signed the mortgage, giving it to the banker, I found as many as 4 changers. I'm talking about the holder is the person you agreed to do business with. Yet let's call that Bank A. But it went to Bank C, Bank B, excuse me, Bank C, and Bank D. In other words, it changed hands to E in 12 days. So what's going on here? There ain't no sense going to a bankster if he's not going to hold your note there safe. I tell you, you go to a government agency, they'll have your note there. They'll have it. One of the biggest reasons is so that the bankster doesn't get subject to the TARP proceedings, the TARP collection of trust funds that you can have access to, the Smith Act, and the other is, believe it or not, the majority of those companies don't exist. They're UBOs, unidentified business organizations. So when you check with the Secretary of State, they won't be of record doing business in that state. They won't have had a certificate of authority. They won't have a live person in that state responsible for the behavior of that company. They're non-existent in fact. One of the reasons for that is that the banksters don't want people to stop walking into the bank. And if the word hits the news media all over the country that this bank's doing this foreclosure here, there, bang. Nobody will walk in there. Guess what happens then? There's nobody to pay the light bill. Nobody to make payments on the Crystal Palace or the hired help that's hiding there. Nobody will come. So they spin it and give the word. Well, let's just say they sold your note to somebody who now says they got a claim and they're giving you notice that, by summons and complaint to come to court because they're going to take the property. Well, you gotta take a look at the clerk of court's file to see if the original note is recorded there. You got to see if the original mortgage is recorded there with the clerk of court in that case. You hear me? Otherwise, the judge will have zero subject matter jurisdiction. Two parts to jurisdiction. Personam, which is you and your body showing up, and the other is the contract. No copies, none of that bullshit, the original. Because if they can't produce the original, they're not a buyer in fact either. And if they can produce the original, guess what? You now want to see the bill of sale on your promissory note. Are you hearing me? It's important. If they sold it, what did they sell it for? You're entitled to that bill of sale. And you're entitled to a canceled financial instrument that says what they paid for it. Like a check, cashier's check, whatever. You won't find none of that. It goes on and on and on and on. And everybody along the line is scamming on it. And these attorneys, what are they doing representing non-existent companies? Remember I said UBOs? Unidentified organization. Not only that, if they're unidentified, they can't commence any action in state court against you. So it's high time for a special appearance only for the limited purpose of motion to dismiss. That restricts the court from even thinking they got personam jurisdiction, and of course in that motion you certify that on the clerk's record there ain't nothing. There's no the original promissory note's not there, original mortgage there. Even if they think you may have signed it, you don't know it's the one until you see it. And then under the rules of evidence, if you testified for it, well then it would be yours. But of course it's not your job to testify against yourself. Just kind of take a look at the Fifth Amendment once. It's kind of an important amendment. Let them bring somebody who can certify that he personally witnessed you executing that instrument. Why give up what you created the money for and gave to them? Because when you give those signatures to them, guess what they're going to end up with? They're going to keep the note, even after they get a judgment to take the house. Then they own the house. Prior to that, they didn't own nothing. They got your promissory note, so they still have possession of the money. And then they got, guess what? Now they got the property. And they'll use the fuzz, the coppers, I call it cop us, to go and take it for them. The theft of equity is in the trillions of dollars now in the United States. Why is it so important we put a stop to it? After you've fought for years, to make a living and to acquire something, that having something causes you to go out and work hard in an attempt to keep it. Well, what happens when they take all the stuff away from you? Where's the incentive to go work anymore? I'm telling you, it's the economy in this country that keeps things going. If you backed up to the 1930s when we had the Depression then, I was pretty young then, like I wasn't even a twinkle in somebody's eye in the 30s, because I didn't get born until 41. Now, there were so many banksters all over the country, thousands and thousands of them, that went down the tube. They were either shut down or they closed. And everybody thought, well, they lent my deposits, that's why I can't get them back because of this depression. I'll tell you what happened then. There was too many banksters for the economy to afford to keep. You can only keep so much. You can only support so much without, no matter how hard you work. And when it gets beyond that, they'll suck the economy dry. Well, when it got down to not many banksters left, guess what? The economy started picking up again. What have we got now? What have we got now? They're taking the economy down. And why? Why is the government backing them up? One of the things in my work and in my travels is I got to speak several times on the telephone with the member of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve from the Kansas City district. He was the member there on the board. And there's 12 of them in this country. Nevertheless, I'd call him at home at night. His name was Governor Wayne Angel, and every time I asked him a question, he would he'd answer. Now, you start to get respect for somebody that when you ask them the old hard questions, they give you the old hard right answers. Not the manufactured ones, the ones pursuant to law. The last time that I talked to Governor Angel of the Kansas City Federal Reserve, I said, Governor Angel, I'm just a farmer, and I've been calling you, and I really appreciate you giving me the information you have. And one of the pieces of information he gave me was this. He said, Ron, you don't understand. The collection of interest in this country by our member banks is the biggest source of income the federal government's got. He said, the national banks spread out around collect from the state banks through them to access the Fed, and it's deposited with us, and we pay our bills out of that incoming interest. And roughly half of the interest collected in this country ends up being deposited into the account of the Treasury of the United States government. So why do you think they took taxpayer trust funds to bail out scam artists? Because of the revenue that the federal government gets from the collection of interest. So when you sign that promissory note creating that capital, you become enslaved to pay interest. And it became interest more than you could pay as the economy slips away. So in other words, there's too much debt. But the government's not opposed to too much debt because they were benefiting out of the interest being collected. And if the bank doesn't collect it, they'll just offset the bank's trust funds that are put at the Fed. You hear me? Each bank is assessed so much pursuant to their volume of cash that has to be transferred to the Fed for safekeeping to cover non-performing loans if that's necessary. The Fed will just offset it because they already have the money. Anyway, that was one of the problems that we ran into was the total lack of understanding of the law. And I want to tell you also by the Fed, because I got sued in a number of states for trying to help people rewrite debt, excuse me, under terms and conditions they could live with. And in the process, they brought in Fed attorneys. They also brought in, Trudy White, the head of the Dallas Fed, because, man, there was a tremendous volume of rewrite done in the state of Texas. And, of course, the Fed doesn't like losing control either. And they were concerned about that, so they threatened their member banks not to participate in any other trust rewriting. And so then I got asked to speak to the Independent Bankers Association down there to explain what the farmers were doing in the field of rewriting. It was perfectly legitimate, and it was perfectly under South Dakota codified law. It's the same as all credit card companies use, by the way. They all have to register as a trust in South Dakota in order to participate in 4714 of the South Dakota codified law. So, but I asked Governor Angel, I said, Governor, there are these, you see, people have a direct right to go to the Fed if they're turned down everywhere else along the way. They can go to the Fed discount window with their financial statement, a note payable to the Fed, a mortgage payable to the Fed. Are you hearing me? And the sections of the Code of Federal Regulations under Title 12 that apply to you and you assert right on the instruments. And so there ended up being busloads of farmers going to the Fed discount window. And they got a discount. That's all by statute too. Yep. Well, excuse me, under the statute, under Code of Federal Regulations. And it's still there. But I asked Governor Angel, I said, look, what do I got to do to get the Fed to comply with these three sections of the code? I said, are you telling me that those sections no longer exist, that they've been canceled either by the Secretary or by Congress? No, Ronnie. He said, no, they're there. They're still valid. Yeah? Okay. Governor, can you tell me what I need to do to get the Fed to comply with those sections of the code? Well, Ron, he said, that's easy. Oh, I said, I'm just a farmer. I don't know what I got to do. He said, all you got to do, Ron, is make us. I'm going to tell you, every person that they had working for them that came to testify in cases that were brought against me, they blew every case up because they didn't know the law. They're working right there at the Fed, and they didn't know the law. But I'll tell you this, Governor Angel knew the law. And he knew it was the Fed's policy not to comply with those sections. Why? Because the banksters wanted to steal equity. Yep. And so their policy at that time was not to comply with the law, so we did something else to go around it and do it up straight away. And by the way, we didn't charge any fees for doing anything because in this country you've got to have a privilege to charge a fee. I didn't have no fees. We were just looking at rewriting debt under terms and conditions we could live with. especially when the banksters, that's the last concern they would have. So that's terribly important. But I just want you to know that the majority of the foreclosures going on today are not legitimate as a matter of law. And you've got to start searching, and discovering for yourself, because you can't believe what I'm saying until you see the facts in front of you. And you only get them in your case by looking, by compelling interest. I mean, the information. You can make a letter request. You always want to keep every request. Why? Because then you can show the court, if you end up there, that you made every effort. And of course, one of the ones you want to find is the banker's blanket bond. Mr. Banker, please inform me of the name and address of your banker's blanket bond carrier, your insurance company, And also, I want the one, if it's not the same, I want the one that's covering your errors and omissions insurance, because you see, it's your duty as a litigant trying to protect the property that you have title to from being taken. And you have an obligation to notify the insurers of their potential risk. Now, if they're totally ignoring, you don't have any choice but to bill them for the face value of what they're claiming. Because who gave them the money? Look in the mirror, in case you can't understand what I'm saying on the debt capital system. Look in the mirror. You're it. When they changed the system, they put you in power of the creation of the capital. Yeah, when you sign the mortgage, it is possible for the bank to step in and move the process, but they got to do it lawfully, and I'll tell you what, their numbers are never correct. Never. Because they do the accounting a different way. So everything pays interest first, and that's not APR. That's not annual percentage rate. Nope. And so you've been double dealt. Fraud is a serious matter, and anybody that gets caught with fraud, we've seen it where attorneys refuse to come to court. They always got some excuse not to come to court, so they want to take a telephone conference. So they'll represent whomever they purport they represent, and by the way, they can never produce an agreement or an appointment to represent any financial institution. They never can produce it. Why? Because they don't have one. Because the financial institution don't trust them, and they don't trust the financial institutions. It's that simple. You got two thieves there, tentatively working together, but they don't want to be bound to each other by agreement. You hear me? That could be litigated. Because it shows intent on the part of the bankster. And they want to stay exempt from intent. So they use stooges to go out and do their stealing for them, paperwork-wise and otherwise. Terribly important, but this is what I've saw. And then the other thing is people that have vehicles and so forth. I'm telling you, you can get the arrangements rearranged under terms and conditions you can live with. You better put those away where only you know where they are, because you've got equity in there, and nobody's saying who's going to write you a check to redeem your interest in the property. Get one first before you turn it over, otherwise have it restructured under terms and conditions you can live with. But sitting there in the corner and hiding is not going to do it for you. And I want to tell you, a prominent insurance man in the state of North Dakota, he informed me of the insurance business inside out. And he said what the bankster doesn't want you to know, so that you will tell the insurance company of the potential risk, because the insurance company will raise the premiums drastically to the bank. And so because you see, they don't disapprove of getting information like that. They use it as an excuse to increase their revenue, the insurance companies. But anyway, what's your job? Your job is to see to it they have notice of the potential liability of whatever that face value is they put on paper. Remember, there has to be a summons and a complaint. Otherwise, you got this other issue with no summons. Judge, no process here was commenced. There's never any summons issued or served upon me. And you have a right under the rules of service of process in North Dakota, it's Rule 4. You have a right to a multiple of services on that summons. I always restrict my service of process to me to personal service of process. I didn't get no personal service of this from anybody. So you're not served. You're entitled to personal service process. Well, I don't want anybody coming and serving me. Well, I'm here to tell you. There's another person involved in the scam as the process server shows up. Get their name, get their badge number, whatever you can get, including the license number on the piece that they drove there in. You see, you have all of these rights. And I'll tell you, when the clothes they're wearing starts to look dirty to the court, all of a sudden you're not involved in foreclosure anymore. But until you stir up the muddy water, they're just going to continue to steal and they're going to hold you responsible. And so I want you to know that there are many people in this country that have been able to save their homes. Because disaster above, are you hearing me? Nobody wants a disaster, but when it comes, opportunity below, there'll never be a more serious thing come about in your life than learning the law and the process to defend. And it's probably the thing you least want to learn right now. But when you got this disaster, now it's your opportunity to learn. And I take my hat off to those that have prevailed in keeping their homes and their vehicles by standing up for their most basic rights. You can't be donating everything. When will you get that promissory note back? In the farm credit thing, we saw people that had lost their farms for 20 years before they ever got the promissory note back. So they had furnished all of that money to the farm credit system on the face value of the promissory note, and they hadn't had any use of it for 20 years. I mean, it's theft extraordinaire. Also, I'm going to, be hard with you on this. The most unsafe place you can have money deposited is in a bank account. And why do I know that? Well, number one, I operate on the basis of cash because I can buy things cheaper that way. Number two, everybody believes they got FDIC insurance on their deposits. You hear me? Checking and savings, FDIC insurance. Yet, I ask you straight up now, how many of you that have signed an account card at a Banksters office and got a copy of the ABA account agreement so that you know what the hell the deal is that you got into? You ain't got it, get your buttons down there and get it. Because you have a right to know. There isn't a week that goes by that they don't even, the bankster violates the account agreement even. And people lose their money. No. There's a few reasons in there, actually 3 big ones, as to why they can't take those funds and give them to somebody else. Well, you're not in possession of them. Also, if somebody's going to levy on your funds in there, you got to do something within 20 days. You'll get an expedited, ex parte court order to stop it. You hear me? Or get the bank to voluntarily stop it and get you your money out of there. That's up to you, what you can get accomplished there. But otherwise, you need his heirs and omissions insurer, and you need his banker's blanket bond. Now, I'm going to tell you about FDIC insurance if your money's lost in those accounts. FDIC insurance contract is a contract that only insures your deposits if they exist still in the bank when FDIC officials come in and close the bank. It's only from that point after. If the records show you got deposits there when they've closed the bank, could you probably in a year, maybe I've even seen it go to 2 years before you get the deposits out of the bank through FDIC insurance. So what is the FDIC insurance contract that seems so valuable by depositors that's not valuable to depositors? It's a contract for closure of the bank without any legal process. The regulators can come in, run everybody out. They got it. Well, then at that point in time, your deposits that are still of record there, if there are any, you may get eventually at least a portion of them. That's how thin that is. So take a look in the mirror as to who you trust with your funds. I'm going to tell you, and I cast aspersions on credit card companies too because of the rates in which they charge. The other thing, it's all unsecured debt, and there's a provision in that account agreement. Once you get it, you look on the instructions on offsets. You'll find 3 exempt there. Number 1 is if your money is there only in your action to it is only in a representative capacity. It can't be offset on any claim against you. And number 2, if it's a cash deferred or retirement account, it can't be offset. And number 3, if the alleged debt was created out of a credit card transaction. Even if the credit card company goes for judgment, they can't offset those funds. So you've got remedies there. Remember, a credit card is all unsecured, and at the time you signed the application, you signed the promissory note that they put the amount on. You didn't get to put it right in the sum. They wrote it in, allowing you to create M2 of the money supply. And that's why anybody can refuse to accept a credit card when you go through a store, because you're buying M1 merchandise with what? M2. And anybody can refuse that. Now, if you walk in there and you're buying M1 merchandise and they're in business, lights are on, they're in business, they're legitimate, and you hand them cash, they can't refuse to accept the cash for the instrument. But also, I'll tell you, the credit card companies take at least 7% from the distributor, whether it be Walmart or whether it be, parts and services. Are you hearing me? 7% of the gross amount for clearing the instrument. So in theory, if we were all dealing in cash, we could buy everything that's out there that we're purchasing now, including food and other things, parts, repairs, all of that good stuff, for 7% less. Because the credit card companies are taking it from the retailer. It doesn't make a difference whether it's clothes or what it is. And so that's what you need to recognize as well, and then look at what they're doing to you. The only people that I know that continue to use credit cards are those that pay them on time before the end of the time period for payment is made. And of course you can do it, electronically now. So you can wait up to the last minute to do it, but do it electronically. But see to it they get paid. Otherwise, all these other charges apply to you. Plus, you bought merchandise with it that you could have saved 7% on by dealing in cash. Anyway, I'll say again, the most unsafe place you can have money is in a bank account. And they're doing everything now to get these stooges to go out and do the stealing for them without their name showing up in the process. And I'm here to tell you, when you compel those documents to be brought forth and filed with the clerk of court or judge, you dismiss this thing with prejudice. It's going to be done, and if the judge refuses to do it, you want him to do findings of fact, conclusions of law, and you want to see the signature on the judgment because you're going to file an appeal. but in a state proceeding, same way if you got another problem in a federal proceeding. You appeal up, because that gets higher up to the law when you appeal up. And of course, the United States Supreme Court, that's where these issues go. Right up there. The United States Supreme Court refused to take any petitions for certiorari on farm issues. And I'm not so sure now, I could be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong, I'm not so sure they'll take any appeals on home stealing either. And I don't like to see it that way, but that's the way it is. I also want you to know that late this afternoon, I got to see Michael Moore's latest movie. And I'd seen some of his others. And this one impressed me. I'm telling you. And it's his movie on capitalism. And I think you need to go to that, in all honesty. And I usually, don't pitch for something like that. But I'll tell you, he stood out there and he took risks to try to disclose what is really going on for those that are behind the scenes that are manipulating the stealing of your assets for their own personal gain. And he's got a lot of good names in there. If you take a little scratch pad with you, you'll come home with some reminders. Of course, maybe a little later on we'll be able to just buy it at a video store or something like that. But I'm here to tell you, it's good, and you need to know that there's somebody else seeing it. That's in the producing end of a movie. I was impressed, and it's a friend of mine that insisted I go. Now, so I went, and I enjoyed it tremendously. As a matter of fact, there was numerous times I had tears in my eyes because he was so correct. And those that were speaking on there were so correct, that were on our side of the fight. If you don't fight for your rights, you got them. If you don't fight for them, you hear me? You don't stand up for them. If you've become a sheeple, you're going to waive these too. You have to fight for them. And guess what happens? When you do a good, clean job of fighting, blessings come. You're not exactly sure how you're going to win, but I'm here to tell you, like a farmer would say it, shit happens, and blessings come. And I'll tell you what, after a blessing like that, you wake up in the morning, you'll feel a lot better and a lot more like a person, you hear me, that has stood up and fought for what is theirs. And that gives you a level of puffing up a little bit. There's nothing wrong with feeling good about prevailing, winning, doing what's right, standing there on your rights. Oh, it might get you scared a little bit, but there's one thing. Don't be afraid of standing up. Because what's the worst that could happen? You could lose. I got to see it a little worse than that. To cover up the thefts that they committed, they would charge me criminally with what they stole. They took it. I had it all appraised even, because I knew what they do. And a lot of places out here in the Wild West, they just burned down the whole farmstead. Or they killed you. But the bottom line is, if you're afraid to go to jail, go visit one while you can still walk out. I'm going to tell you one other thing, and this is hard for people to stomach. In the state facilities, I was put there for 20 years hard labor for driving my combine, harvesting the crop I planted on my folks' property that I had been leasing on a sharecrop basis for 30 years. And the bank wanted to, Banksters wanted to steal the property. Yeah. You know the crop? And have a neighbor do the stealing of it so the neighbor could use that on a down payment on property that the bank didn't own. But everybody believes a bank, if the bank sold it, he must own it. Now, and guess what else? In the Michael Moore movie, they talked towards the end there about life insurance policies. How many of you have ever checked with the life insurance companies that are authorized to do business within the state where you live to see if there is any life insurance policies been issued on your life? They talked about that tonight. They benefit if you die. Now, you know, blessings from even I have rated sufficient to have blessings. This prominent insurance man came to the site one day while a SWAT team, 3 members of a SWAT team, we know what the AR-15 machine guns, man, they had belts of ammunition like they were running a war. And there was a 12-man SWAT team that came out to our farm. And they wanted to take a tractor that I have paid for. And they wanted me to help them steal it. And I refused to help somebody break the law. I ain't gonna do it. Anyway, I asked them for a court order. You got a court order? You know, I'm assuming you may have a copster someday wanting to kick you out of your home. You got a court order? Have you got a writ of execution? Because you got to have the sheriff's writ of execution if you're going to stand here on this property. Because the sheriff's supposed to protect me even though he's never been told that. You hear me? So you got those, you got a court order, you got a writ of execution. By the way, you got a warrant for my arrest? If you ain't got one, go get it. And then, number 4, show me the liability insurance policy you got for twice the value of what you're here to steal. Why? Because I got a claim against this bankster. Now, one of the things banksters like to do is hide behind companies. Lawyers tend to want to hide behind law firms. Law firms can't practice law. Only the lawyer can. You hold lawyers responsible for what they're doing. You hold banksters responsible for what they're doing. The live bodies in the bank. So if there's a claim for offset on your part, each one of them gets billed in whole and in part for the full total sum of what they are demanding. And let them try to justify not paying that. Especially when they're a commercial operation with a privilege. Because you can ask the banking commissioner in your state, assuming you've got one, or the commerce commissioner in your state, to cancel the banker's permission to do business in the state, if indeed there are any. Otherwise, you inform the insurance commissioner to withhold offset the amount of funds you got coming from the reserves that the insurance companies have put up with him in order to be able to sell insurance in the state. I want to tell you this. My wife wasn't insurable for liability insurance because she was close to death. They knew it, she knew it. They took out 3 life insurance policies that we later found. We got copies of them. On my wife's life, and the bank was the beneficiary, and she knew nothing about them. Nothing. They had a horrendous one on my life. I knew nothing about it. This fella in the insurance business searched the companies and found these 4 policies that we knew nothing about. That to the bankster, we had been beneficial if the SWAT team had smoked us. And that's what they were to do. And there was only a couple of things that interfered with them smoking us. Because you're dealing with organized crime here. Make no mistake about it. And that was, we had a fellow there with a camera taking pictures saying he was from the National Enquirer. Well, I never saw anything come out in the National Enquirer. We had a hired man, hired girl there, watching. My mother and my aunt was there, watching. My 3 kids were there, watching. And my wife and myself. And I want you to know that when I sent my wife to the house to check to see if with the clerk of court in Fargo, North Dakota, Cass County District Court, clerk, if there was a judgment indeed, that, you know, because I hadn't, you know, there hadn't been no judgment in the process that I knew of. At least come and tell me that there is, and then I'll just, you know, stand aside, not in the way, and maybe even help. But they had disconnected the phone before the SWAT team came in. And they sent Machine Gun Kelly, the head of the SWAT team, and Babyface Dawson. Yeah. And then the others under them. And I got beat up really good, hauled to the prison, to the county jail. And I was charged with obstructing a governmental function because I wouldn't contribute to theft. 2 little, very little paragraphs below that in the same century code, it is lawful to obstruct an unlawful governmental function. I was acquitted. I could go on for case after case after case. There might be some of that for you if you stand up for what's right. And I'm telling you, don't be afraid of it, and here's why. In some of these places I've been, like the state pen or on the federal one, I found more honesty in there, more decency in there than I ever saw or heard in the hallway of a church. Because in those facilities, they got people's attention. They have the ethics, the rules, the prisons book, state and federal. They got their own books. And you get one of them right away and you follow the rules. The only thing you're missing in prison, in all honesty, is liberty. All the rest of the rights you've got. But you've got to assert them. Even if it takes your writing on toilet paper and handing to a jailer. You got a right to habeas corpus. You got rights that just don't end. And I want to tell you something else that I find absolutely unbelievable. And that is the warden at this time at the state penitentiary in North Dakota said, Ron, when I first came here, I took a look at all the cases that were here. Because I wanted to see what the percentage rate of those that are here that shouldn't be here. And he said, 74% of those in the state penitentiary at the time he came there had no business being there. And if they would do some things for themselves, he'd turn them loose. You know, like Rule 35, for instance. Read it. It's in the criminal rules. By the way, they're in here. There's also other important things in here, like the rules of judicial conduct. Are you hearing me? They're in here. The lawyer's professional responsibility rules are here. Do you know you've got a right to do a complaint to the bar, to have the attorney investigated for what he's doing and have him permanently disbarred? Get on it. In this state, I have had direct influence in getting even a justice off the Supreme Court of the state. Can you imagine one justice writing all of the opinions for the farm credit system in the state? I went to where he came from to check to see what in the world is going on there. Well, he was a blue chip borrower in the farm credit thing. He had $40,000 worth of stock in the farm credit thing. Of course, he was never issued any certificates because they never ever registered any or never issued any. They just took the money. And he had a $400,000 loan, and he was 2 years behind in payments. He wasn't being foreclosed on, but he wrote every opinion for the Supreme Court against the farmer and for the farm credit system. I presented that to Penny Miller, Secretary of the Supreme Court at the time, 30 minutes ahead of my oral argument. Well, that just delayed my oral argument by another 45 minutes because they had to remove the justice from the bench, go down the street and find a surrogate justice to come in and sit in that spot. He was done serving on the Supreme Court. Same way with local judges, liars, cheats, thieves. You can't assume they're going to ever rule for you. What your job is in all of the court process is to what? Make the record. So if you do a disciplinary complaint on a lawyer, also file it in the case. Be sure you got the case heading on it and the case number on it. You hear me? You send it out, not just to the Bar Association, but to the Secretary of the Supreme Court. Why? Because it's the Supreme Court that allows anyone to practice law within the state. It's the Supreme Court that allows it. The process in between is to do the trial, the proof, provide the proof, the testimony, and all of that for the Supreme Court to say, he's done. And we just got another one done. It was in the Fargo-Fulham here not very long ago. And that's one of the things you got to watch out for in newspapers too, is those people that are buying big ads in there supporting their banking operations. Those people won't write negative things against banksters. Yeah? Oh, anyway, I'm just telling you, I learned the process. I did learn it good enough so that I got more judges off the bench in this state than anybody else and more attorneys out of the practice of law than anybody else, and I'm still at it. And I'll tell you, nationwide, you need to take a look at cleaning up the system, because it's no use in we the people having a system that we're not keeping clean. Especially when the law is there, the rules are there. And if you don't, if you don't like the rules of judicial conduct in the, this is right here, rules of judicial conduct. If you don't like those in the state, and by the way, quote the ones that they're violating. But I also like to quote, especially the ones from the United States Supreme Court. Rule 455, A and B. There can be, a judge cannot conduct any impropriety or even the appearance of impropriety. That's what A and B stand for. You got to make the record, or there's never any going to be made on them. Here's the impropriety. Boy, he sure gave the appearance of it. This is what he did, that, and the other. Remember what your job is? Make the record. Because once you get that record made, the chances of you winning on appeal are pretty good. Yeah, you got to do a notice of appeal, you got to do a briefing. Well, I don't have money to this, that, and that. You need to get the record typed up. Here's what I found in a federal facility. 95% of those that were locked up at this facility were never even charged with a criminal offense. And you're looking at one. But I used another way of getting out of there, because I knew they were putting me away so that they could burn my home down, that they could steal what else they wanted to steal without me being there. So I was there with a lot of good folks that had spent a lot of money on defense and didn't get one. And one of my friends that I made there, he'd spent $550,000 on a defense fund, and he was never charged with a crime in fact. So you don't count on attorneys for a defense. You look in the mirror. It's your job to make the record. And all I had those guys do after the fact, after they're sitting there, they're all good name and reputation's all shot. You hear me? Some of them even divorced because their wife don't want anything to do with them anymore. Family, kids didn't want to be associated with daddy anymore. Was write a letter to the clerk of the U.S. District Court. This is a federal facility now. U.S. District Court, requesting a copy of the grand jury transcript. And the clerk would write back in most cases and say there ain't one. They better be, because under the rules under Title 28, the clerk's responsible for having that transcript in her or his records. It's required under the rules. So you can assert it. The rules of court under Title 28, United States Code. And of course, then these people would start, what? No transcript? And they said I was indicted, so there had to be a grand jury? Yeah. There has to be a grand jury of not less than 12 that show up. So you're supposed to be 24, but not less than 12 that show up. And they all have to sign a grand jury concurrence form testifying with their signature on the concurrence form that there's probable cause for the U.S. attorneys to bring criminal charges. What if you're missing that? What if you're missing both of those? Whether it's just the U.S. attorneys, who, by the way, get the privilege to practice law, not by the federal government, but by the Supreme Court of your state. What if they just falsified the document called indictment? Did anybody ever check that for them, that they had for lawyers? You know, a lot of things they'll do too. They'll appoint you a public pretender. That's what I call them, because I've never seen one yet that ever did a job of defense. But anyway, to hear this guy, he served 2 years of a 20-year sentence already, and I got to see him, and I said, you know, Jimmy, I don't think you were indicted. You just, you know, I've been around you some, I see what you do and the things you do to help people and so forth. I said, I just don't think you committed a crime. I don't think you're indicted. In fact, oh yes, he said, I was indicted, Ron. No question about it, I was indicted. I said, well, why don't you prove it to me that you were indicted? So he wrote the clerk of the federal court in Brownsville, Texas, and requested a copy of the grand jury transcript. She hauled it off to the judge right away, and the judge issued an order denying him access to it. Well, that's in violation of the rules. Rule 16 of the federals, like the same rule in the state. Here in North Dakota, Rule 16, he's entitled to everything under Title 28, 3500. He's entitled to it under the Brady Act. You see, you got so many rights. You can't just sit on them. You can just sit there and be a dumbbell if you want, and you'll leave there a dumbbell. But it's job to learn. Anyway, so he did an expedited, ex parte request for the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals to order the district court to order it prepared and get to him right away so that he has it to prepare his brief. Now, it's already too late to file a brief or file a notice of appeal, but he did. And being that he was in prison and denied access all the way to at that point in time, if he was denied access basically because he didn't know any better. He requested it, and the Fifth Circuit ordered it immediately prepared and given to him in this federal prison. And he got it, and it's at midnight. And all of a sudden, he comes on court. And I said, Jimmy, shh, you can't raise a fuss in a federal prison in the middle of the night. Or even during the day. Let's talk about it in the morning. Guess what he had found in that transcript? The U.S. attorneys had prepared death certificates to give the grand jury. Was there a grand jury? Yeah. Did they vote? Yeah. But you can't give the grand jury false information, and that's why you want the transcript. Who lied to the jury? Anyway, what was so cute is he had the transcript for the trial, but he didn't have the transcript for the grand jury. So when he got that one, 4 of the people that were listed dead were live 9 years after they were dead because they showed up and testified for him at trial. Now, I'm telling you, that's how dishonest the system can be. Falsifying death certificates. He was entitled to a Franks hearing, but none of these lawyers he hired ever booked a Franks hearing to question the witnesses that testified before the grand jury. I mean, I like the laws in this country. They're unbelievable. And at the state penitentiary, all them kids that were there, I'm here to tell you, they didn't know anything about Rule 35. Well, Rule 35 is you can all sentences in this country are overdone. Overdone. And so that's because every prisoner has an access to Rule 35, and they can apply for a reduction of sentence and give some good, valid, clean reasons for reduction of it. So what I'm trying to say to you here is don't be afraid of criminal process. My God, if they're going to take you in, make them carry you, and don't sign nothing. And they won't be able to collect from the taxpayers for your keep. Remember, it's free board and room there. Yeah. Those places aren't bad places. I mean, it was so nice that the warden in the state penitentiary was so knowledgeable. One day he came to me and he said, Ron, I looked at your file. What are you doing here? And I said, Tom, they had to get me off the street so that they could cover up the theft. Well, he said, you were never charged with a crime. I said, that's right, but I said, there's lots of people here that weren't charged with a crime, in fact. Well, he said, put in an application. He said, I'll have you out of here at the next parole hearing. I'll get you in there. Okay, Tom, I'll do that. By golly, 2 days after the parole hearing, I'm down the street. Now, I'm telling you, there's so much remedy. Remember this. They ain't got your signature. You know, if they steal your billfold, your belt, and your shoes from you, they want you to sign, that's giving them permission to take them. I just say, hold it. You stole those from me. Don't lose them. You don't have to give permission for those that are doing things against you. You do nothing. Yeah, nothing. You don't sign. You got to sign pay sheets. You won't get paid there. I wouldn't even if I did. I don't sign. You know, and the safety reports. You don't sign. You don't sign nothing. That way they're going to find out that they're going to end up broke given a length of time because of the fact that they can't collect for your keep. And I learned that from those in Operation Rescue that were taught by the leaders of the Roman Catholic Church. I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I'll tell you what, I certainly can learn from others that know what it is they're doing. And when they got out of jail after all the processing and so forth, there's nobody wanted them in anybody's jail because there was no way they could collect for them because they didn't have names and they didn't have addresses. It's not your job, man. You testify against yourself whenever you do this. Don't do that. If you don't prepare the document, you hear me, for your own defense or for your own dismissal to get rid of the case, if you're not preparing your own documents, don't sign them. But if you're preparing them, you sign them. The theft of homes in this country is, to this day, continuing to destroy the economy. Even though the government backed up the banksters, we got more banksters clipping the public, clipping the economy, because the economy is made up by working people that are producing something, not those that's skimming it. Are you hearing me? We got to get rid of a whole bunch of those banksters or this economy is not going to come back around. And one of the ways of straightening this problem up is for you to protect your property. You see, banksters have access to a tremendous amount of information. Number one, they collect a whole bunch from you right up front, and a lot of it they get from you. And then other information that they want, they get from others. And they can even not only take out life insurance policies on your life, making themselves the beneficiaries, because they can get the SWAT team to go out and do the killing for them, but also, I'm here to tell you that they can get you fired from your job because they know the people at the company. That'll trip you financially. And then they steal not only your promissory note, but also your assets. Now, I'm here to tell you, we ain't going to have a country that belongs to we the people if we don't stand up in bunches. And for what I'm saying, please go, check the theaters in your area to see Michael Moore's latest issue. He did a good job on this one, I'm here to tell you. And it's called Capitalism. It's the name of the movie. And at least you'll get another person who's done some big research with big names in this country. Yeah, because he names and shows the pictures. Yes, and you need to know where the sucking off of the producing people is and what to watch out for and how to defend yourself. And I'll tell you, there's only one way, and that's to get with it. If you got any questions on anything on this, you can always replay it, but even if I haven't answered it all the way you would like to hear it, you can call me. Now, I don't exactly like to give this number out because there's only so many hours in a day, but I'm going to give it to you just as soon as you used it as confidentially as possible, and that you use it on the basis of needing to know something. There are no fees. I cannot charge nothing. I am not authorized to practice law, and I don't. But I can tell you what I would do if I was in the same scenario as you depict to me. And you got to know your basis. You can't believe a thing those people say. You got to check it out. Are you hearing me? But here's the phone number. 651-319-1904. Got it? And I'll certainly tell you where to look, where to shepherdize things that you're going to need to know. But I want to tell you something. You can't expect anybody else to do it for you. You got to make up your mind. You're going to see this through. And I'll tell you what. Win, lose, or draw, you're going to be a better person for doing it. Because it is a learning process to learn the process of law and so forth. How many of you have been going to church off and on or regular or whatever? It takes a long time to learn this. Well, the constitutional rights, you don't have any if you don't assert them and stand behind them. Your job's to make the record. I got something here. So this problem, this took place way back in the days of agriculture, when they got everybody up a tree. That's on the back of it. And they got all the gunsters there, including the badge carriers and the television and everything, and the press, chasing them up a tree. And what's entitled? Billions for the bankers, debts for the people. Okay? I just want you to know that this has gone on for a long time. And right now, it's gotten so big that in the last 3 months, there was 100,000 homes taken away from people in this country by the scam artists. 100,000 homes. They got the homes because these people didn't stand up for them. Why didn't they stand up for them? They didn't know what to do. They're not taught the debt capital system. They're not taught in school the law. Are you hearing me? If there's anything I can ever accomplish in this country, it's to get good presentations made in school on the debt capital system. It'll work for you as long as you know what it is and where it is and what's it about and who's in charge, and also the law and the process. There's process. I'm here to tell you. But if you don't declare any of it, none of it's going to be used in your benefit. And I'll tell you what, you can lose in the lower court and win in a court there up, because I managed to do so. On that case where the warden put me out, I said, how could you be charged? I said, it wasn't, in fact. But the judge that sat on the case was a classmate of mine in Fargo Central High School, Fargo, North Dakota. And when this crooked bankster came to town and purchased this bank, the first thing he did was fund this classmate of mine's election for judge. The bankster funded it. So who do you think the bankster is going to rule for? And if they need to cover up a crime they committed, they'll get the judge to slam dunk you or me. So be it. I'm not afraid of any of those facilities. I'll tell you what, I've made more friends in those facilities than I ever have on the street, because most of them knew nothing of the law, and that's why they were there. Education in the law, the basic law of our country, and how to use the court process, where the rules are, and study them a little bit so you can see the validity, the ability of it. That's terribly important, because I'm going to tell you something. Knowledge of the law is respect for the law. And if you possess no knowledge of the law, you won't have respect for it. And you will cause problems for yourself. The other, law of contract. Remember, they got to have your permission to do it to you. They ain't got it. And who's in control of that pen? You are. Look in the mirror just in case you get lost. You're it. There's lots of places you can get information. There's also scam artists running around out there, so be aware of that. Not everything in enlightening information is good. But when you got these serious problems, it'd be nice to talk to people that have prevailed too. And that's terribly important. And they compare notes, and you can always get access to documents. You know, if you've never prepared them before, you can go to the clerk of court locally where this problem is and ask to see a case, so you can look at what a summons looks like, what a complaint looks like. In North Dakota, and it was 1962, the state legislature adopted the Uniform Commercial Code. Check in your state, because I think North Dakota was one of the last states, other than Louisiana has now adopted it as of a few years ago. But pretty much all the others have got it. Uniform Commercial Code. That's an important document to have too if you're doing contracts. The bottom line in the Uniform Commercial Code is that the banksters went to the state legislature in North Dakota and said if they didn't pass the Uniform Commercial Code, the banksters were going to pick up and leave the state. Now, had I been in the legislature at that time, I would have gone to the microphone and told the banksters, there's the door. Adios. And don't let the door hit you in the ass. Just out of here. Because they wanted the ability to steal anything and everything you got. And guess what? The legislature in North Dakota passed it in rough draft form, and the banksters wrote in the rest afterwards. That's sick. So you can't count on legislators. And of course you'll see some of that when you see the Michael Moore presentation on capitalism. Well, have we about eaten up the time on the record? Okay. Now I want you to know that I wish you the best. Keep alert and do the follow through, and don't start if you're not going to follow through. You hear me? Because I don't want you to waste your time just because you listen to this. Because if you don't follow through, you will lose. Because theft is the name of the game today, and you're dealing with organized crime. There is no finer form of it. And I'll tell you, those within the system that should know the law and so forth, that don't, it's unbelievable. I only found one person in the Fed that knew the law. There was hundreds of them that worked for him, including their attorneys didn't even know the law in the Fed. You hear me? Fed's attorney out of St. Louis coming to Illinois after. I kept getting sued by attorney generals because what was happening is farmers were breaking the chain on the stealing of their farms by rewriting under South Dakota. So be it. You know, but I don't know how many people are up to taking all of that heat and all of that abuse, and I don't wish that upon anyone. But I'm here to tell you, you stand up for what's yours. And that will benefit every citizen some in this country. Okay? Hang in there. God bless you. Goodbye. Okay, there's a couple of important things that I forgot in the rest of the presentation. I'm sorry for catching in after the fact here, but it's terribly important. To try to cover up the taking of property, what's happening is one company that purports to exist is suing for another company that purports to exist. And the bottom line is, I want you to have a rule that you write down. It's very simple. No company, which is a dead person, can foreclose for another company, which is a dead person. These are all so-called creations under law. But one company can never foreclose for another company. And here's a case right here. J.P. Morgan Chase, you don't get more dishonest than them, as trustees on behalf of registered certificate holders of GSAMP. It's bullshit. One company can't foreclose for another company. And when you take a look, neither one of these are registered in this state to do business, so they couldn't bring any action in state court. Well, when they start pulling that crap on you, you can put up the rest of the defenses, but there's something else you can do that's extraordinary. That is, you get yourself a book on federal rules of civil procedure, criminal procedure, and you'll see that under the federal rules it is possible, under Title 28 of the United States Code, 1446D, to remove the state case to federal court. Being that these actors, have a real problem with understanding that one company can't sue for another company. Now, if you looked at yourself as a person, you can't sue for another person. Why, you see, you got to have this privilege in the middle, Well, these two are two privileges to begin with. Somewhere, maybe even offshore, not even domestic. But the bottom of the line is, once you give notice that you are removing the case, it's instantly. All you got to do is read the section of Title 28, 1446D, and you'll see it's instantly removed to federal court. Well, now, where are they going to come up with their foreclosure statute? You see, it's a little hard to foreclose in a jurisdiction where there ain't any foreclosure statute. And if you run the process there to get them to pony up proof of stuff, they'll run for the hills. But also, in the process, be sure that whatever claim that one company is making for another company, that amount is billed to the attorneys. Be sure you bill them exactly that amount, plus a reasonable cost and fee for having to respond, having to do the removal and so forth. And by the way, you can get away with all of the legal process being stone broke even, as you do a formal papyrus filing. It's just a statement that you don't have. It doesn't mean you're broke. It just means you don't have enough money now to cover for that and order the transcripts for this or whatever. You do a petition in form of papyrus. And there's nothing wrong with being poor. I mean, you're looking at one that is. It's also good business in this country to be doing business not in your name, but in the name of your estate or trust or something of that nature. Also, you not only bill the individual actors in the case, and be sure each one is serve notice of the billing. You got 30 days to pay. But also you add on, not only them, but any and all John and Jane Does hereafter appearing. It sure has a way of scuttling process. As long as, be sure you bill at least what they're asking for, because they didn't put no money down. They didn't lend anybody's deposits or anything. If indeed they did something, you make them pony up all of the proof that they actually did something. But also you move to dismiss on the basis that one company cannot sue for a foreclosure for another company. And law firms can't practice law, so you go after individual lawyers in whole and in part for the total sum. This one here, they're trying to collect some $70-some thousand plus attorney's fees. Well, you have a right on discovery to find out what they charge per hour for attorney's fees and how much they've spent so far, because you can ask for the specific sum plus all hereafter and acquired, because you're entitled to not less than half of the fees that they collect. I got the Bar Association in North Dakota to agree to that. Just half. Where, in other words, we farmers are only half as good as lawyers. So you don't want to overcharge. Don't be, kicking things in the numbers and get them up in the millions when they're not there. In fact, you destroy your own credibility by doing that. But anyway, standing up is what it's about. And I apologize, I missed earlier and didn't tell you about. They're pulling that trick. You have one company suing for foreclosure for another company. Baloney. Can't do that under state law. And where are they? In state courts. And where have they registered to do business in that state? More than likely, nowhere. So who do you hold responsible then? The individual actors that's moving the process. And sometimes they change. And one of the ways so you don't have to bill each time they make a change is to be sure, and all other John and Jane Does hereafter appearing. So that's constructive notice to anybody else that wants to jump on the scam thing to try to steal your home or your business or your vehicle. The other thing is no liability insurance. Judge, they're going to move any farther in this process, you produce it. Now I'll tell you what it is in North Dakota when you demand it. It's twice the value. So if you got a property there that's worth $100,000 they're claiming, judge, make them put up a $200,000 bond to move this process. Because one of the things you'll find, like in this state, oh, they're not obligated to have any liability insurance. Oh yeah? Where's the protection to the public? That's some crap you may hear from the Bar Association if you do a disciplinary complaint, but you want them to insure their claim for at least twice the value. Now Minnesota has different rules. They 1.5 times the value. Well, fine, that'll work too. But you need to find out in your state what the value, whether they require for value, and insist that they furnish third-party surety to cover you. Because they're out there to steal. Make no mistake about it. You'll find it's the finest case of organized crime there is. And by the way, I was invited to New York once by a family in New York. And you probably heard about them over the period of time. I'm here to tell you, they ain't organized crime when you compare them to these people. The Banksters are the worst you can find on the face of the earth for the most part. Here's how many I found that were a benefit to their community. A total of 5 different banks being run by 5 different bankers. They were an asset, but it's so few and far between it isn't even any use conducting the search. I'm just telling you, it's that bad. And if you get a good one that's been good for a few years and then all of a sudden it changes ownership, you're in a hurt bag right then and there, okay? Follow it, stand up for your rights, only you can assert them, nobody else. Thank you very much. He's about ready to shut off this machine for the second time.